your chawal, dal, and roti. These are the things that you're eating every single day. You believe it to be your culture. It is not your culture. It is the leftover remains of the British. It is a show of being poor.
Why are Indian men seen as weak, as submissive, as inferior? No, really, why? Is it their bodies, their culture, their history, or something much darker? This video isn't about trolling. It's a wake-up call. We're going to trace this perception all the way back to famine, to colonization, to religious distortion, to modern-day ignorance, and hold up a mirror most people are too afraid to look into. If you're an Indian man, you need to see this. Let's begin. Why do you think Indian men are so often perceived as inferior, both globally and sometimes even within India itself? Where do you think that perception actually comes from?
Because Indian men are not dominant, because Indian men are submissive in nature. Let me be more elaborative on what that means. So, as a man, what you present in your sexuality or even in your gender itself is domination. If you're a man, you're supposed to be strong, you're supposed to be imposing, you're supposed to be intimidating. That is the rule of the nature. That is how mate selection also happens. But unfortunately, the situation with India is that we are not as tall as the global average. We are definitely not as muscular as the global average. And then there is also the perception of not appearing white. And that is also considered to be inferior, but that is more of a colonial leftover. So it's a social cultural issue and not a issue that Indian men can fix. But that is exactly the point. Even the fact that Indian men are short, or the fact that they are weak, are not exactly or necessarily their own cause. They did not make themselves short or weak. You know who did? The British did. When during the colonial era, or even before that, I think even before during the Mughal eras, there had countless famines throughout the country. What a famine does is that it makes the body adapt to a low availability of food, and therefore the body's propensity to store fat, it increases. The body's propensity to have muscles, it decreases. You only need to do endurance type work, right? You're lifting things for a very long time throughout the day. You're not doing macho man heavy lifting every single day, and that is the reason Indian men, or like Indians in general, I guess, even for women, they have like very big bellies and and very thin arms. Why is that? That is because it is all a colonial leftover due to famines. So that is one of the reasons. But that is just the very surface layer reasons. Even if colonial era never happened, there is a good chance that Indians might have ended up in the same way.
Interesting take. So you're saying the perception of inferiority isn't just social, it's rooted in historical adaptation, colonial damage, and even biology. Let me ask you this then. If we trace the image of what a dominant man looks like, tall, muscular, confident, how much of that standard is actually universal, and how much of it is just Western-coded dominance?
It's very universal. Hell, it's biological in nature. I mean, think about it. Even in animals, the strongest males usually win. That is a core theme among mammals, the kind of animals we belong to, right? Mammal males are taller and stronger, and they compete with each other for resources. They compete with each other for mating and social status, and that is how evolution slowly happened, so that the stronger ones survive. And that is the reason we are where we are. But there is a deeper point to that. Keeping that aside, keeping the biological aspect of things aside, Indians are vegetarians, and when you are vegetarian, you're bound to get weaker. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not going to argue the moral and ethical considerations when it comes down to being a vegetarian or not being a vegetarian. I'm simply talking in terms of muscle building and biology. And very truthfully, if you do not have enough protein in your diet, you are going to have muscle atrophy later in life. You're going to develop type 2 diabetes, you're going to develop heart issues, you're going to develop kidney issues, and it is very common. If you had with good protein sources a 2% chance of developing diabetes, with no protein in your diet, you're definitely increasing your chances up to 20% perhaps. I mean, it is like orders of magnitudes higher when it comes to no protein. You know why that is? Because just like you eat carbs, just like you eat fats, protein is a macronutrient. It is very important, and unfortunately for Indians, we do not have that enough in our diet. And you know why the reason is? You might think it is your religious considerations is the reason why you don't eat food, right? Because your religion tells you not to eat these things, and most people stop thinking at that level. But reality is, this is also the done duty of British to a certain extent. Hell, when famines happened, only the very cheaper grains were available for us to eat, and because everything else was very very expensive, right? There is a shortage of food. So what happens when there is a shortage of food? You start eating the cheaper grains, which is rice, which is wheat, which is pulses. So your chawal, dal and roti, these are the things that you're eating every single day. You believe it to be your culture. It is not your culture. It is the leftover remains of the British. It is a show of being poor. It is poverty speaking is the reason why you eat it. It's because it was cheaper, and that is what we have leftovers. And that is just one aspect of it. If you want me to get into the religious aspect of it, it goes even deeper. You know why it is said that Hindu Brahmins should not eat meat and remain vegetarian? This has nothing to do with actual Vedas or Upanishad or the religion that you follow. No. You know what? Even if you go back and trace your history, if you actually bother to read the Ramayana written by Valmiki and not the Ramcharitmanas written by Tulsidas in Bhakti Bhav, you will know the real Ram who existed then. Even he, in the verses, hunted and killed deers and ate them after doing a yagna. And it is very common for even God himself to eat it. And let's keep him aside. Even when you're talking historically, Brahmins used to sacrifice animals, and they still do across the country. They do it in Uttarakhand, they do it in West Bengal, they do it in southern states. Vegetarianism is simply a tactic the religious leaders of a particular time adopted when Buddhism was rising, when Buddhism talked about not killing animals. That is when, because that is the particular time period when this vegetarianism was slowly adopted. You need to know that when you say you're a Hindu or a follower of Sanatan Dharma, you're simply a Puranic Hindu. You're only following Hinduisms as written in the Puranic things, in the Purans. You're not following the Vedic Hinduism. You're not following the Hinduism of the Upanishad. So you're not necessarily a complete Hindu because you have no idea of what your actual religion is. Your religion does not necessarily permit eating animals. You can eat animals. There is a particular vidhi to it. There is a particular ritual to it. When you do hunt and kill animals, you have to perform a yagna and you have to give it to certain gods. But you can do it, and it is encouraged. Because yes, Jeev Hatya or killing animals is considered to be a sin, but the reason you do the yagna is to purify yourself of that sin. That is literally written in the Valmiki Ramayana, and you wouldn't know of this because none of you bother reading the Ramayana in the first place. None of you bother reading your actual text in the first place. You, even the Puranic stories that you follow are things that you heard from elsewhere. Do not attribute your non-consideration for your own religion, your negligence and ignorance towards your own culture and your own history to following that culture or history. The reason you do not eat enough protein is not because you're following a religion, is because you're listening to everyone around you, and without actually thinking about things. You lack critical thinking is the reason you're going to appear and remain weak. And this micro level reason is the reason in macro scale Indians have a perception of being inferior to the Western mind.
So what you're really saying is this: the inferiority of Indian men isn't genetic, it's historical. It's not spiritual devotion, it's misinterpreted submission. And even that submission was shaped by famine, colonization, and co-opted religion into a culture that worships weakness in the name of morality. That's the real punch here. You're not following Dharma, you're following trauma. And until Indian men confront the true roots of their diet, their strength, and their identity, they will always be perceived, and perhaps remain, inferior. Want to push deeper into masculinity perceptions next? Or go back and challenge the whole dominance equals masculinity assumption.
No, I'm simply going to give a conclusion to this because this video was more so as a reality check for a lot of my fellow Indian brethren at what they are doing. Listen to me. What you are doing is ultimately a form of ignorance, right? You know that for a fact. You refuse to study, you refuse to look at what protein labels are, what nutrition is all about, why you do what you do. You just want to be led like a sheep. You just want someone to tell you and give you the answer, right? I'm not going to do that. I think I've given enough answers unintentionally in this video anyway. But what I am going to tell you is that ignorance in Sanskrit means tamas. And tamas is the closest to the word evil we get in Sanskrit. You're going against everything that our culture and our religion stands for. You are the evil of the culture and the religion that you're trying to defend. Just keep that in mind. And sorry for being harsh, but be better.
Then I'll take it from here. In a world where excuses hide behind culture and comfort wears the mask of tradition, today we stripped it all bare. What began as a question about global perception became something far deeper. A mirror held up to every Indian man who's confused inherited inertia for pride. You were never meant to be small. But if you stay blind to the reason you aren't just weak, you're willingly so. If that stirred something in you, subscribe, because this channel isn't for comfort. It's for clarity. And remember, patterns are everywhere.